All I ever wanted was to be recognized for my work.
Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is TheJackSilkstone. So, recently, after uploading the video, the best ever Thorpe Park Fright Nights, I got a load of comments from you guys and a load of messages saying that you really enjoyed that kind of video format and the way we looked back at an old Fright Nights event. So I thought in today's video we wouldn't just look back at one previous Thorpe Park Fright Nights event, but we would look back at the entire history of Thorpe Park Fright Nights as I share with you guys the top 10 scariest mazes to ever be at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. Now, when I was coming up with this list, there was a slight problem in that I haven't been to every Fright Nights that's ever been at Thorpe Park, meaning I haven't done a few of the mazes that have been at the park. So this list is partly personal to me, but I have also been talking to a few different people, and this list is compiled of many people's opinions. So obviously you guys might not agree with it, and that's kind of the whole point of horror mazes, really, isn't it? Like, not everyone likes the same thing, but I tried to make it as much of a round list as possible. But yeah, otherwise, let's get into the list. These are the top 10 scariest mazes to ever be at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. Let's go. So, in at number 10, we are unfortunately starting off with a maze that I never actually got to experience. It is the Passing. Now, this maze was open during the 2012 Fright Night season and was located within X's old extension queue line. The Passing was unique for a number of reasons. First of all, it was the first ever upcharge Fright Nights attraction, which meant guests had to pay £3 to experience this maze. I'm very glad that the idea of an upcharge attraction isn't really seen at the park much nowadays. But a more positive side to this maze was the fact that it was the only ever hooded maze to be at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. So yeah, you basically spent the majority of this maze with a bag over your head, meaning you couldn't see anything that was going on. And yeah, as the name suggests, the story of the maze was basically you dying and passing over to the afterlife. There was even a fake ending where you would take your hood off and be presented with a certificate of death. But yeah, the maze wasn't over and you had to traverse through a mini little strobe section to end the maze off. Now, as I said, this is the only ever hooded maze to be at a Fright Nights, although this year we have of course got Vulcan Peak, so yeah, very excited to do that. But yeah, the hooded element of this maze really threw a lot of guests off and made it a very unique attraction at the park and made it apparently a very, very scary maze. So next up, at number 9, we have a maze that is still operating at the park. It is The Walking Dead Living Nightmare. Now, this maze first opened in 2017 and allowed guests to experience scenes from the hit TV show The Walking Dead. The maze has some amazing scenery, with many of the show's iconic scenes being recreated within the maze. And not only were you trying to avoid zombies in this maze, but you were also trying to avoid one of The Walking Dead's best antagonists, Negan, and his community known as the Saviors. One aspect of this maze that made it so scary was definitely the pre-show, where back in 2017 you had to get onto your knees in a scene that was very similar to one of the best episodes of The Walking Dead. So yeah, the storyline and the amazing scenery in this maze made for quite a realistic experience, which made it one of the scariest mazes to ever be at the park. So in at number 8, and I feel like I should have put this at number 7, we have the maze 7. Now, this maze operated from 2006 to 2011 and was located within a temporary marquee within either the arena or the beach, depending on the year. And this maze was essentially based on the 7 deadly sins. So it was quite a unique storyline. And yeah, with each room that you visited within this maze, it was a different sin. Now, unfortunately, I never got to experience this maze, so I don't really have a lot to say about it, but from what I've heard, it seems like a very scary maze. For example, in the finale of the maze, apparently guests were trapped in a cage. That's all the information I could really find, but yeah, it sounds like a very scary experience. In at number 7 we have Studio 13. Now this maze only operated for 1 year at the park in 2014 and was located within the I'm a Celebrity building at the park. Now this film tied in with the whole director takeover for the park, as the maze was based on the director character who was filming his new film called The Motel. And yeah, essentially within this maze you are able to visit all of the backstage areas for this film, such as the makeup area and the props department, and the finale of the maze saw guests being chased out of a long corridor with a chainsaw. But yeah, I really like the theme of this maze. It fit in with the whole park atmosphere and theme for that year, and yeah, it was definitely a very cool maze. In at number 6 we have The Curse, which is a maze that ran from 2008 to 2012 at Fright Nights. Now once again, I unfortunately never got to experience this maze, and to be honest, from the research that I'm doing, the storyline seems a bit hard to follow, so I'm just going to read out the description for this maze. Venture into a disturbing crime scene full of dark and sinister secrets that have laid dormant for years. So yeah, a very brief description, but essentially from what I can tell, this maze was about a ship and the captain and his lover went overboard or something like that. But yeah, from what I've heard, it was a very intense maze, and it even featured like a water feature in the middle of it, which sounds really cool and is not the kind of thing that we've seen since The Curse. So yeah, it definitely sounded like a unique maze, and apparently it was very scary. So then we now reach the top 5, so from here things start to get very serious, and in at number 5 we have My Bloody Valentine. Now this maze was introduced to the park in 2013 as part of the Lionsgate takeover, and it served at the park until 2015. Now this maze was situated within a number of shipping containers that were themed to show scenes from the My Bloody Valentine film. Now the thing that made this maze so scary was the claustrophobic nature of the maze, with all of the corridors within the shipping containers being very narrow, as well as the very clever use of crawl tunnels within this maze. You really felt like you were quite trapped in, and the fact that most of the actors within these shipping containers all wore gas masks and were walking around with pickaxes, it really felt like there was no escape, and it made for a very eerie and, as I said, claustrophobic atmosphere. In at number 4, and only narrowly beating My Bloody Valentine in my opinion, we have Cabin in the Woods. Now, as I'm sure many of you are aware, this is one of my favourite mazes to ever be at Thorpe Park. It was introduced in 2013 also as part of the Lionsgate takeover, and was located within X's old extension queue line. Now, with this being a Lionsgate maze, it was of course themed to the film Cabin in the Woods, with many of the rooms within the maze being recreations from iconic scenes in the film. Now interestingly, Cabin in the Woods was the first maze at Thorpe Park Fright Nights to utilise the free flow maze design, allowing guests to essentially choose their own route through the maze. And this really added to the scariness of the maze, as it was very likely that you could be split up from the rest of your group, particularly in the first half of the maze. And then once you reached the second half of the maze, you essentially just went down some very long zigzag corridors, which might not sound like the scariest of things, but the way that the actors were able to interact with these corridors made this maze one of the scariest mazes I've ever done. Like, these actors would like arch over the corridors and literally bounce off the walls. They used to go crazy in this maze. And yeah, it's definitely one of my favourite mazes that I've ever done. I have many fond memories within this maze. So we now reach the top 3, and in at number 3 we have the legendary Big Top. Now this maze followed the story of the Figaro Bros as they invited guests to visit their abandoned carnival, and well, although it didn't have the best of opening years back in 2015, in 2016 and 2017 this was easily one of, if not the strongest maze on park for these years. And there were several aspects of this maze that made it so scary. For example, in the pre-show where you had your future read by a fortune teller, or the strobe section where there would be clowns literally running around and popping up in front of your face. And then in 2017 there was of course a little multi-route element where you could choose one of 3 routes to take. It was such a cool maze, and the whole circus theme made it very scary, especially if you are scared of clowns. And the finale of the maze of course featured a clown chasing you out of the maze with a chainsaw, and it made pretty much everyone that went through that maze sprint out of those exit doors. So yeah, Big Top has always been a massive fan favourite at the park, and that's because it was such a good maze and it was definitely very scary. So in at number 2 we have Experiment 10, which was introduced to the park for the 10th anniversary of Fright Nights. Now, although this maze was only at the park for 2 years, it quickly gained the reputation of being one of the scariest mazes ever at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. Now, the maze itself was located within shipping containers, the same ones that we used for My Bloody Valentine and are being used in Do or Die this year. And yeah, within the maze, guests were essentially taken on an access all areas tour of a chilling and disturbing government test laboratory where the latest project, Experiment 10, seemed to have taken a sinister twist. So yeah, that was the theme of the maze, and first of all you may notice that it is quite a realistic theme, and that made the maze so scary because it was almost as if it could be a real thing. So yeah, the fact it felt so real made it extra scary. And one of the particularly scary parts of this maze was near the beginning, where essentially as part of a decontamination process, guests were placed on their own into individual pitch black cells where you would be held for a few minutes and released one at a time into the maze. So basically every time you did this maze you had to do it pretty much on your own. Now this isn't something that we've ever seen at Thorpe Park Fright Night since, I guess, Cabin in the Woods kind of, you can go on your own if you want, but in this you really didn't have a chance. You were shoved into these solitary confinement cells, and yeah, you were dragged out of there by these people in gas masks. It truly seemed like a terrifying maze. I almost think Thorpe Park are too afraid to make a maze this intense again, but I would love to see Experiment 10 return to the park one day. So, in at number 1, the scariest maze ever at Thorpe Park Fright Nights, we have the Asylum. Now, this maze ran from 2005 right up to 2013 within the building that I'm a Celebrity is currently located in, and Vulcan Peak is taking place in this Fright Nights. Now, there wasn't particularly a storyline to Asylum. It was literally just you were entering the asylum, and within there you encountered all of the patients that inhabit the asylum. Now, the thing that made this maze so scary was the combination of the blaring alarm style audio along with the super energetic and crazy actors, all whilst these blinding strobe lights were constantly going off. Like, actors would appear close to you and then they'd be gone and then they'd be back in your face. Like, strobe lights are so scary, and they ramped them up to the absolute max in this maze. And of course, the famous finale of the asylum saw guests being chased down a super long corridor by a chainsaw wielding patient. It really was an incredible maze, a very controversial maze, unfortunately. But yeah, I know so many people that love this maze and talk so highly of it. And I think most people will agree that it was the scariest maze to ever be at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. So yeah, that was the list. As I said, it wasn't the easiest of lists to put together. But yeah, let me know down in the comments if you agreed with the list, and if not, let me know your top 3 scariest mazes that you've ever done at Fright Nights down in the comments below, and I'll be going through them and replying to you guys. And who knows, with Fright Nights 2018 just about to officially kick off, we could be seeing a completely different list in a few weeks' time, with mazes such as Do or Die or Vulcan Peak perhaps making it into the top 10 scariest mazes ever at Fright Nights. And talking of these brand new mazes, if you would like to see footage from within these mazes first, then be sure to subscribe to this channel, because I'll be getting a ton of Fright Nights videos out very, very soon for you guys to watch. And yeah, I do hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. My name is TheJackSilkstone. Goodbye.